Thank you, President Donna. The title of today's presentation is Leading Our Community Forward. How do we all row together? We will be hearing from Renee Moe, a member of our club, who became president and CEO of United Way of Dane County 2 years ago. In addition, Anna Burish, 2017 chair of the board of United Way of Dane County, will also be speaking. Anna is the associate director at the Burish group of UBS. We look forward to their presentation, and we have made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for speaking with us today. I'll now turn the podium over to Renee and Anna for today's program. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having us. And thanks for the excellent lunch. It's my first time being in a Rotary meeting, and I'm learning a lot about your organization and the good work that you do. One of the things when you look at it, the title of the topic today was going to be Leading Our Community Forward. How do we all row together? So if you think about it, it takes a lot of coordination to row. Everybody's got their own agenda. Everybody's got their own rhythm. So in order to win, you really have to have someone who's willing to understand what the goal is, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. You'll notice also we kind of added on another person, Rich Lynch, who is very familiar with all of you. Rich is the past president, so we thought that he'd be able to add some insight and will help us close and answer questions. If we can go to the first slide, please. Oh, that's me, right? Sorry. Technology is not my strength. This first slide, if you look at it, I think really is a visual that helps to explain what we are attempting to do. When you think about it, rowing, it takes a lot of people. So we think of ourselves here at United Way as basically the intersection or maybe a roundabout in trying to coordinate what the community needs and how can we execute that to the best of our ability. There's a lot of things right now that are going on. We, United Way, share same roots as you as Rotarians. The Downtown Rotarian Club, I found out, was started about 95 years ago, and it had similar founders. When you guys were brought together as a business club, United Way was given the task to be able to coordinate giving and helping organizations. So if you think about it, 95 years ago, there's a gentleman who would be able to help us think about 95 years ago and what the world was like. It's quite different now if you think about it. A lot more moving parts. In 2005, we introduced a thing called Agenda for Change. Some of you might be familiar with that terminology. Yeah? Raise hands. Have you heard? Excellent, excellent. Because I know there are a lot of people here who are volunteers and give time to United Way, so thank you very much. But in a nutshell, if you think about the Agenda for Change, it's where we changed giving out and addressing specific needs, stepping back, looking at the community holistically, and trying to figure out how do we really solve the big problems of Dane County. Move forward now. In doing that, we realized that instead of just giving out individual and meeting individual grants, we needed to step back and see what the community needed, how could we put programming, how could we coordinate nonprofits and get the best for our community. Right now, we are the largest private funder in Dane County, and last year we were able to dispense $20 million, which we're pretty excited about. Now, there are sheets on your table because this is quite fine print. One of the things, no, yeah. When you're looking at this, what I'd like to be able to show you, it's a little bit complicated. But whenever you're trying to address change or implement change, as we all know as business people, change management can be very difficult. First off, you have to list what is your goal. So if you look at the very first column, it says the agenda for change. Underneath there are three different factors that we look at, we think as a community are really important and totally intertwined. You look at it, we think that there's education. Without education, it's very hard to move the people. Financial stability is a critical thing that's becoming more and more, we're becoming more and more aware of. And if you are not healthy, which is the third component of a really healthy, thriving community. In that first column, you're going to see it's the agenda for change. There are 2 items per topic. So in the fine print, my ophthalmologist will be so pleased. I think I can barely read that, right? Children are cared for and have fun as they become prepared for school. So that would fall underneath education. The second item is also education. We also understand our goal is to move people out of poverty, which, as you know, is really in the forefront of everything. We're currently working with about 1,000 businesses. Many of you are part of that. Thank you very much. You're probably very familiar with the annual campaign. So for all of you that give to that, thank you. For those of you that don't, please see us. I'm kind of like K Cash. We're raising money, right? And we're always willing to take more donations. The second column kind of explains what our scope is. What are we trying to do? If you don't understand what you're trying to accomplish, it's very hard to get it accomplished. The third column will say our goal. What's the impact that we're really trying to make as we move forward? And the fourth, like everything, if you don't measure your results, it's very difficult to know if you're successful. When I looked at this and I was thinking about the person who was talking earlier, Mary Crave, who was talking about your project at Katamasu. She went through those 4 steps. She understood what is the goal, how are you going to solve it, how are you going to measure it. So you guys are already incorporating that in the projects that you do. No different than we do in business, no different than we're trying to do at United Way. We work with about 100 nonprofits. Anybody know how many nonprofits there are in Madison or in Dane County? Yeah, over 7,000. Okay? Yeah, exactly. 7,000. How do we choose these 100? The 100 obviously have to be able to align with our needs: education, financial stability, and health. In that, we have 50 staff members that are full-time that help us drive what we're trying to accomplish. We have about 500 dedicated volunteers. Many of you in this room would be one of those dedicated volunteers. On top of that, we have tens of thousands of additional project volunteers. Some of you probably have served on that also. So for that, I thank you for all the time. But what we're best known for and what we really stand on is that we really are data collectors. A lot of times when projects are going on, the small nonprofits aren't able to really have the ability to do research and really understand what they're trying to do. So we gather all that data. So whenever we're looking to do a project, it helps us figure out where are we starting, where do we want to go, and how we're going to get there. When you're looking at this, in a nutshell, and I'm going to turn this over to Renee now, if you think about it in Dane County, and this number constantly surprises me, there are 64,000 people in Dane County today that are in poverty. 64,000. How many friends do you have on Facebook? Right? I mean, that's an overwhelming number. And how do we describe or define what poverty is? Poverty would be for a family of 4 to live off of $24,000 in Dane County. The thing that always amazes me is that out of those 64,000, 12,000 of those are children. They're under 18. Think about your own kids. And if we scale that down even further, 5,000 of those 18 are under 5. When you're thinking about that, that's why we're so dedicated to the next generation. We're trying to break generational poverty. And so Renee is going to take us through the next couple of slides and tell you how we're going to do that. Thank you.
President Donna, I will take that fine for that request. Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Anna. Obviously, it is such an important role in the community to be the chair of the United Way and to really help be in charge of the stewardship of all these resources. And I cannot thank Anna enough for her service and leadership this year. Obviously, Rich Lynch is past board chair, and so many of you, Gary Walter, Londa Dewey, Dave Stark, and many, many board members past and present. Roberta Gassman, Brian Chan is here. And I went through the Rotary book and I circled a lot of the names, and it just got to be a whole big highlighter because so many of you are involved. So I just want to also echo my thank you to each and every one of you for making this work go. And there's not enough time to go into all the different projects, but I'm going to highlight where some of you are intersecting in some of the work that we're doing and really bringing this to life, what Andrew was talking about today, as we all think more about how do we row together in the community to get more done. So first, I want to pause and reflect on where we currently are in this point in time. So we all know there are many changes to our economy and to the workforce, right? We've been talking about automation and big data and those kinds of things. The state of Wisconsin talks about 46,000 unfilled jobs by 2022. And when we think about the amount of jobs and looking at the data locally here in Dane County, numbers are still kind of are different across different categories. And so we're looking at really honing in on what does that need look like here in Dane County, but we know it's a lot. And as I meet with CEOs on a regular basis, they're saying to me that's one of my biggest concerns is talent, retaining, attracting, and making sure that we're hiring great people. So that's really important in terms of what's going on here. We're seeing skills and quality mismatches over the course of time, so we're trying to get ahead of that and figure out what can we do now for people who are looking for employment and getting that connected. You also have technology, right? We're talking about mobile, driverless cars are coming in 10 years or maybe sooner or maybe later. Bitcoin's been in the news again, and so all those changes in technology and what that means for us in terms of our economics are coming up. And it's not lost on me that last week when we heard Mr. Sykes talking about binary polarized culture, when we're thinking about politics, that today we're talking about rowing together. So I think about that context and what we're trying to do in terms of where can we agree and what can we actually get done. And I think most of us agree that we want to invest in our children and our families, because regardless of political party, regardless of income, we all know that when we invest in children and families, our neighborhoods are stronger, our schools are stronger, and our workforce is stronger, and that makes our society better. So that's where we can all agree and where we can do this work together. Also race relations, and if you watched the Golden Globes or saw the coverage, gender relations, and all of that context that's going on in our community, as well as framing of social issues. So we have often talked about health in terms of health care, and now we're thinking about social determinants. What are the other things and factors in life that make ourselves as individuals healthy and make our communities healthy? The environment, look at the opioid crisis that we have right now, mental health, behavioral health, and violence and safety. And there's been a lot of conversation in our community about what does that mean in terms of our violence and safety and stability across Dane County. Sound familiar? Yes. And I'm talking to so many people each and every day who are asking questions. What are we going to be doing about this? What's happening? How do we make progress on that? So let's take a look at another point in terms of our growth. So we have over 500,000 people in Dane County today. I remember when that number was at 300,000, and even before when there was a 2 at the beginning of that, and now here we are, 250,000 people in Madison and over 500,000 across our county. We're projected to be at 606,000 by 2040. And so along with that come a number of factors that we have to be thinking about. There are annually about 600 births every year, about 3,000 deaths, and we also have a lot of migration happening. So right now we have about 9,200 coming in annually, about 8,650 going out. And I want to also make sure we take this pause to talk about one of the myths we have about migration in our community, and that is that we are a magnet for individuals who are coming to have resources and not necessarily be productive members giving back. And when we look across all income levels in terms of in-out migration, we see the lower income migration is actually at about an equilibrium as well. Across the entire population that is coming in and going out, the majority are from Milwaukee, Chicago, Minneapolis, and Wisconsin counties. And of the top 2 places where people are coming from, Milwaukee and Chicago, it's about 9% of immigration, and 80% are white. And so I think that we have to really understand that a lot of the issues we're seeing as we're growing is coming from all different sectors, and we have a lot of educated folks, people who are coming for education as well as those coming for high quality jobs that are also a part of that migration that we're dealing with. And it is some of the tensions that are being caused by higher quality of life, higher cost of housing, and the capacity for us to have higher end housing and other kinds of things that are driving more stress in the lower income families as well. So we know most people want to do things the right way. They don't want free handouts. So I want to really understand and really underscore in terms of migration that we got to look at the data and the facts in terms of who their population is and how those demographics are changing. Our largest growth is in Madison, Fitchburg, Sun Prairie, and Verona, probably not a surprise to us. By a show of hands, who lives in those communities in this room? Right, you see it. You see the neighborhoods expanding, you see the stores getting busier, you see the parking lots getting more full. And we know the population over age 65, you've got 30 years ahead of us. Good job. It's going to grow 130% over the next 10 years. And that has significant implications for those of us as caregivers of our parents, for those of us as partners to folks who are aging in our own households, as well as other issues in terms of healthcare and senior care, what that means for us going forward. Employment, housing costs, what this does to our schools, law enforcement, community safety, and again, of healthcare and senior care. A lot of changes that are going on here. Again, we heard a lot about this, right? Lots going on. And what does this mean in terms of how we shift in terms of resourcing here in our community? So we all want to have a great quality of life. And when I talk to many people, they're trying to figure out how do we maintain this quality of life that so many of us have and try to extend that to others, especially as the community is changing and growing in dynamic ways. So we know there are declines in public funding, and there have been a lot of changes in tax law, right? With the standardized deduction move, it's beneficial to so many people, and there's a lot of worry right now. What does this do to the charitable sector? And across different groups, either partisan, bipartisan, or nonpartisan, the estimate's about $20 billion of change in terms of the charitable sector. So what does that mean? If there's less money going into public services, what does that mean for nonprofit services? You know, again, there's no judgment here. It's a fact in terms of something's coming and it's changing, so we have to be aware of that. Also, local business shifts. We have seen internally where are companies housed, where are leaders living, how our workforce is changing and growing. Larger companies, with Epic as the exception, are downsizing headcount, and you're seeing the growth happen in small and mid-sized companies. You're also seeing a lot of change in terms of donor demographics and workforce demographics. People who used to invest in the common good, it was the right thing to do, long-term systemic change, are now looking at more choice. What's this project? What's that more immediate gratification I can get to see what's going on? And how do we use crowdfunding, right? We are now not necessarily investing in sort of these larger systemic things, and we're looking more at how do I help that person with this particular need in their family today. And they're all good things, but they're changes that we have to be thinking about. And we also see the power of civic engagement and volunteerism. Much of this is being driven by social media and discourse and how people are talking to one another about changes that are going on. So the implications here are really about thinking through, point in time, what's going on in the community, what are these shifts in terms of how are we able to make change and how it's resourced. And just as you look at your businesses and your personal finances, we, as board members and staff at United Way, have to think about what does this mean, because it has impact for each and every one of us who live here. We can see and feel and touch the results of what happens as a result of the work that's happening each and every day. So for those of you who were in Rotary when I was president up here a few years ago, you know I believe that the best change happens when you take the best of what has been for 100 years of Rotary and build toward the future. And I certainly have the same point of view because I've learned that from so many of you. And in this context, we have had wonderful leadership to say, how do we take the best of the changes we've been able to make together, understand this new current environment, and move that forward? And we know there's not enough resource and not one organization can make this change happen. So I want to give you some examples of what has been working and then think about how we can do this more effectively together. And we're lucky, last year, Bob Trunzo, who is the CEO and chairman of CUNA Mutual Group, was our campaign chair, and he was able to help us invest more in data analytics, more in digital engagements, as well as segmentation to be able to figure out how can we better understand the nonprofit sector, how people want to engage differently through volunteerism and giving, and how do we make sure that anyone who wants to make a difference has access to the data, the information, best practices to drive these changes forward. So new ways to tackle old problems, education and innovation, leadership capacity, board trainings, community of practice for nonprofits, new collaborations, and being able to shift and allocate resources to more accelerate change. So that's the context. Are you with me? Okay, great. So here is what's actually working. So before I want to launch into this, there are some common perceptions that I want to acknowledge. I think there is a general sense from a lot of folks that, gosh, it feels like needs are getting greater, Resources are getting fewer. And can anything be done? Is this just the way it's going to be? And I also hear, there's always been homelessness. Are we ever going to get our arms around homelessness? Isn't that just the way it needs to be? Or there are haves and have-nots, and that's just the way of the world. And whenever those types of conversations are presented, which happens quite a lot, and I think it's very wonderful that we engage in this kind of dialogue, we can talk through, there are things that are actually working. And if we do nothing, what happens then? And so for those who are perhaps wondering, what can be done? I want you to think about that framing and know that as we do this work, we go into it eyes wide open with those kinds of conversations and thoughts. And that's why it's so important to understand what actually is working. So here we have a bunch of numbers and a bunch of bar charts, which you can look at, but talking specifically about how do we get more babies ready for kindergarten. And I think there is now more universal recognition that early childhood is an excellent investment. You have the National Chamber of Commerce even embracing, looking at early childhood investment in terms of workforce development. Private foundations are all over it. And we know there is an extreme ROI based on investing in our babies because you can change more when kids are littler. And it's much harder to invest in young children than to fix broken men, as Frederick Douglass once said. Locally, we pulled together leadership to discuss our youngest community members, lots of familiar names, Ave B from Corals, members Jim Ring, Cheryl Cato, and other business and nonprofit partners. Dennis Winters, he's the state head economist. Healthcare partners, Julie Alec is here, Robin's here, they've done a ton. Library folks from Greg's team, SOHE, School of Ed, School of Nursing, and a lot of businesses who are really interested in figuring out what do we do to make sure that the quality of the community is great for my employees, my customers, and going forward just as a citizen. So that group came together and we looked at the research and a map of what was going on in terms of existing community resources. There are a lot of good people doing really, really good work. And how do we figure out where's our stake in the ground to how to come together and actually make more of a difference long term? So that group determined after a significant amount of time, really we need to make sure that we're engaging and investing in parents. We need to have holistic supports. That's kind of a fancy way of saying make sure families have what they need in our 13 highest poverty neighborhoods across Dane County. How do we have developmental screeners so we know where children are at in the 5 pillars of development that we know they need to have, right? Gross motor, how do you run and walk and pull up? Fine motor, can you pick up the Cheerio, maybe put it on the string if you're a little older? Your communication skills, right? Ba, 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 k, k, sh. Can you make those noises? Can you do the social and emotional engagement, right? Hi, and the baby says hi back, that serve and volley that we need. Are we seeing if our babies can do this when they're little, when they're coming to the pediatrician's office? And that's a really important thing. And we were able to get every healthcare system in Dane County to be able to say, yes, we will use the screener that some researchers at United Way had proposed, talking about the American Academy of Pediatrics. Those health systems, UW Health was one of the first ones, to put it into their Epic software and to have that data aggregated. So every baby in Dane County at 2 months gets their first screener. So we can see that over the course of time to see what's going on. And it won't surprise you that our babies who are receiving care that's being paid for by Medicare are more likely to have developmental delays in those 5 areas. 1 area of concern, 2 areas of concern. And if we can catch this early at 2 months or 6 months, we can give the parents some activities. When you go home, stack some toilet paper tubes. When you go home, take this book, flip the pages around and talk about the colors and the numbers. And we can help accelerate those delays very quickly and very inexpensively because of those unique partnerships together. Now, when parents and doctors identify a delay, and they can do even more if those things aren't catching up really quickly, we can work with our partners at Rainbow Project, DAYS, CSS, RISE, 4Cs, Dane County Parent Council, and others, all partnering to respond. And they can actually go into the home, bring a book, bring a toy, and over the course of time, increase parent confidence and skill to be able to say, here's how I can read with my child. My baby, who I feel like I can only get to calm down when I turn on the TV or hand them a tablet, now I can say, oh, let's get a book, and I can understand that serve and volley, and I can get my baby ready for kindergarten more effectively. We now have over 80% of the children in that program starting kindergarten ready. That means developmentally appropriate across those 5 core things costs $5,000 per child. Many of those children destined for special education and those kinds of things too. So it's really, really an important investment and something that we can all do very critically and very easily there too. CUNY Mutual and BMO are also investing very heavily in early childhoods. I just want to call them through. And of course, many of you know about the Meadowbaum Foundation and the Northeast Side Childhood Zone with the city and the county, trying to make sure that we're looking at our most vulnerable families, because we can do these small investments of more Cheerios and books and really accelerate learning. So why is this so important? We can see developmental delays, pediatricians tell us, as early as 6 months. 6 months. And many of these children get to our schools day 1, 2 years behind. Very, very difficult to catch up. And we can see that from the screeners, and with great partnerships with the school districts all across Dane County, we can see the MAP scores and the assessments and how kids are doing. And these things just build and build. And it's very difficult to get to that point where you're actually seeing those results in terms of test scores. And what happens? Confidence starts to erode. You don't want to go to school. You don't want to listen to the teacher. You start acting out. You're disruptive. And those things just accelerate there too. Okay. I get really passionate about this stuff, so. All right. So we also want to focus in on graduation rates. Many of you are volunteering. Great partnerships with the school districts. So Madison, Sun Prairie, Verona, Madison, Milton Cross Plains, Oregon, and the 9 other public districts are doing a lot of work in the schools. The healthcare systems really worked on bringing behavioral health in with nonprofits. And we were able to, Journey, OFS, Urban League, Central, Briar Patch, Neighborhood Centers, Goodman, Lucier, Wexford, Boys and Girls Club, Big Brothers Big Sisters, networking all these folks together to really focus in on how do we invest most directly. So the strategies are academic mastery. We know kids need to read to learn. And that's really about independent learning. Algebra by 10th grade, it's all about critical thinking. And of course, graduation from high school is now sort of table stakes. To get a job in this economy, you need to have much more than a high school graduation. And this is, I think, is kind of interesting. In Dane County, those without a high school education make about $20,000 a year. Those who with a high school education make about $30,000 a year. If you have some college or associates, about $35,000, and a college degree, $50,000 or more. So think about that in terms of quality of life and stability of families. There are 567 people who didn't graduate from high school in Dane County in the 2015-16 year. We have about 31,000 in Dane County who are unemployed who don't have a high school diploma, adults over the age of 18 who don't have a high school diploma. And that's next, what we're doing in terms of employment. So rowing together, right? School districts, data, nonprofits, and really looking macro, what's that community goal? What are we trying to get done? Who are the partners that have access, who can network things through, and how do we get stuff done? Okay, housing and ending homelessness. Housing First is a program that's helping us actually, we think we're going to end functional family homelessness in the next couple of years. And this is a really exciting thing because we know that with landlords, management companies, and developers, the city, the county, Section 8, we've been able to put together wonderful network programs, Habitat, Porchlight, YWCA, Road Home, Salvation Army, Second Harvest, Community Action, figuring out what are the different points of where people can come together to be able to then make more space to solve homelessness. We've now gotten families out of shelter into stability. It costs half the cost of shelter, and it's twice as effective, and there's way more opportunity there. So with that, I want to turn it over to Rich. Is she cutting me off? Oh, you're cutting me off completely. Okay. I didn't realize we started that much later. Sorry, I'm racing through.
We won't have time for questions.
Oh, okay. Sorry, guys. See, the program committee, when there are more speakers, this happens. Okay. So Wes Rich walks up here. This is a community plan. There are also 16 other entities that have other kinds of community plans. Very few are resourced. Very few have measurable outcomes. Everyone's trying to do good things. And so the opportunity is, where can we align and actually drive things forward and scale the change? Because that's how we're going to get things done. And Rich has an idea for that. Sorry.
Thank you, Renee. Lesson learned, don't follow Renee. I understand everybody's time, so I'm going to be very quick. But I want to tell you that as chair of the board, it was about a year and a half ago,
I realized, we have a great United Way, and everybody should appreciate what Renee and all the others that are involved with United Way are. We're very lucky to have her. But it still came to me at a board meeting that I said, okay, in 10 years, will we still be talking about the same things that we're working so hard on today? And I looked across to our board and I said, is there anybody who feels we won't be? And it wasn't the answer you're hoping for. No, we'll solve it. So it became very apparent there that we had to run some parallel efforts. We're doing great things, but we have to think more collectively. And what can we do differently, and what areas should we focus on? So a couple of us decided we would lead what was called the Economic Stability Council, which was pulling together some funders. So by funders, I mean there's some businesses at the table, there are foundations at the table, the city and the county, the mayor, Joe Parisi, they're at the table to talk about what can we do differently together. And this has been attempted before and usually sort of fades out, and we're determined not to let that happen. But what we started to talk about was, well, my thought was solve poverty in Dane County. Little bit too big. So after about 6 months, including the chancellor of the university came and said, you've just got to narrow this down and focus and accomplish something, do it well, and then start to bring that to scale, which is what we do with a lot of things. But so we said, what are the main issues around poverty? Well, it would be early childhood, which you heard a lot about today. It is jobs, and it's housing. So we spent a lot of time looking at, should we do neighborhoods? Should we take an area and develop economical vitality in a whole neighborhood and tackle things in that way? And we looked at community centers, and we looked at housing as we know it, quote, affordable housing, which is very much in need. But Renee talked about a lot of good things happen, but let me just tell you a couple quick things. There's still over 500 kids every year that don't graduate in Dane County from high school. Still, today. There's still what I would call, there's 6,000 births, and of those births, there's like 750 that are what we would call Medicare babies, those that are in lower poverty situations that go home with their child and need extra care. And Renee talked about a great program, several great programs that are working around this. But there are about 500 babies every year that are not captured within that program for the services that Renee just described, still in our community. And there's still about 5,000 families that are looking for affordable housing. Not that they're homeless. They might be spending more than 30% of what they're making on housing. And that's a lot. We just had a big initiative to put people in jobs, $15 an hour. That's $30,000 a year. If you're spending 30%, it's $750 a month in rent. It's hard to find something in Madison for $750 to house a family. So why is that? The recession has, what's happening now, we're coming out of the recession, apartments are going up everywhere. We all see it. But they're not catering to the affordable side as much as we need it to. So long story short, because it has to be, Renee, we narrowed this down to, we are going to focus with this group, with our funders and all these great minds around housing. And so we're in the process now, but we're looking for creative ways to fast track some affordable housing in town. We have some great partners. We've got some developers at the table, people that are in this world thinking about, can we provide ways to give no interest loans to projects where they borrow money, there's no return for me if I loan them the money, but in the end, if they refinance the project after X number of years, the project's appreciated, maybe there's a return there, maybe there's not. Looking for ways to just bring more people to the table that understand the problem and are willing to maybe get less for their investments, but solve a problem. And it's not just going to be those people that we have at the table. I'm hoping that if we come up with good solutions, we can piggyback this and bring more people to the table to talk about it in the community. Maybe it's a fund that each one of you could invest in, knowing it's going to help our affordable housing issue in Madison, knowing it's not going to give you maybe what you would hope to get on an investment, but someday it might be something less, but we've solved the problem. That's it in a nutshell. We have great people working on it. There are openings for people to dive into other issues, the shortage of ways to get into the homes and help those families that aren't being touched. If any of you want to start bringing voices together that you think haven't talked or haven't looked at these solutions, just step up. It isn't United Way doing it, but Renee said they're a great resource. They've got people, they've got data to use to help your group try and solve some of these things. So thanks for giving me a short amount of time, but thank you for
Thank you, United Way. Thank you for bearing with my time constraints. We went a little bit over, but there's work to do. We know where to get the data. We are adjourned.